Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of my series of tactical analysis videos on the Talking Walls YouTube channel. My name's Gully. If you haven't come across me before, I go by Musings from Molyneux on Twitter. And I'm going to be looking at the defeat to Aston Villa at the weekend, bit of a sickener, having gone 1-0 up and capitulated late in the second half to lose 3-1. I wanted to do a little bit of kind of narrative busting. I think there seems to be this view that Wolves deliberately kind of changed tack for the second half, having played really, really well in the first half. And having watched a game back, just a few things I wanted to point out that um, probably suggest it wasn't the case, and little things that kind of point to where our problems lay in that second half, as well as the virtues of how we played in the first half as well, and a little bit of understanding of how we actually tried to approach the game in that first half. So I'll kick off by kind of talking about our in possession shape initially. If you look here, I've highlighted this triangle in the bottom left hand corner of Ryan Nuri, Mateus Cunha, and Mario Lemina. I feel like this is kind of the strength that Gary O'Neill sees within the team. He wants them to play quite close together. Mario Lemina seems to have taken up a slightly more advanced position than he would have done previously in his Wolves career. With the arrival of Andre, O'Neill obviously sees him as a really key player for us, having given him the armband. And throughout last season, Ryan Nuri and Mateus Cunha linked up really, really nicely. So I really do think he wants to try and get them as close together as possible, as often as possible. And with that, you see that the rest of the team setting up in the way it tends to. Bit of a back three setup defensively, with Nelson Semedo tucking in, and João Gomez and Andre, kind of the two guys that come towards the ball to really try and build play through the middle of the park. In terms of how we set up out of possession against Villa, they didn't play natural wide men from the kickoff. So we had like Jacob Ramsey and John McGinn playing of the widest of the midfielders, and we were quite happy to kind of clog up the space in the middle of the park, not press too high, but kind of sit in that kind of mid-block space without sitting too deep either. And you can see straight away the kind of man-to-man approach that was set up. You've got Andre able to kind of go and cover two players if necessary, and Nelson Semedo tucking in really tight on Jacob Ramsey. And we were looking to be really aggressive. You may recall a few challenges going in. João Gomez in particular really trying to get stuck into Yuri Tielemans, Semedo on Ramsey as well. And for the most part, we nullified them, especially in that first half. Very little by the way of goal-mouth action at our end. And we obviously took the lead and created a lot of chances ourselves. You can see, though, that whilst it appeared that we were obviously the dominant team and we controlled the game in and out of possession, it wasn't necessarily the case throughout. It was a building up of confidence and comfort within the game. It was all about kind of kicking off and really quietening the crowd, making sure that the game kind of had nothing really to speak of happen very early on, settle things down and make sure that the home crowd didn't get behind the team too much. And as you can see with the touch maps that I'm displaying in front of us now, in kind of 15 minutes periods, you can see gradually we exert a little bit more dominance throughout. And by the end, we scored a goal within that middle period there, 16 to 30 minutes. And you can see a variety of chances created with shots at goal from the 31st minute to half time. There was a little bit of narrative around the way we approached the last few minutes. John McGinn had actually picked up an injury and gone off. Villa sat there with 10 men. And I think it's important to understand that the players that are out on the pitch, we have four distinct defenders, four very distinct midfielders, in my opinion, and two strikers. Instinctively, they aren't players who would necessarily go out and score lots of goals. In essence, we've only got two players who've got any kind of track record of scoring goals in Strand Larsen and Mateus Cunha. And the rest of them are very much midfielders, like I say, technical footballers, comfortable in possession. And that's what got us our joy in the first half, playing close together. You can see these are the kind of situations we found ourselves in quite often. Overloading one side of the pitch, and really playing with our technicality close together and keeping the ball away. And what you found was that Villa, who are a team who like to press quite high, tend to have quite a high line. They weren't able to go and press either. Well, I mean, usually teams don't press if A, they're not sent out to do it, and B, if they're not quite sure how they need to. And obviously, they would have had a plan and triggers and things like that they would have set up with from kickoff. But you found quite often that we had comfortable possession deep in midfield and on the back line as well. And that happens because there was some confusion from the Villa side. You'll see here that Mateus Cunha again came towards the ball a lot, and Mario Lemina would have picked up a high position when he did that. And that, I think, was another way in which Wolves actually had a lot of joy in terms of being able to work through Villa's off the out of possession play. I wanted to highlight as well an instance in the first half where we had a really good chance, and this was where Jurgen Strand Larsen went through almost 1v1 against Martinez and forced a save from the keeper. There's context to this in terms of how things played out in the second half, but what I think in terms of the players that we have out on the pitch is the vast majority of them want to come towards the ball, and we really need an outlet in terms of running away from the ball. And despite Jurgen Strand Larsen being 6'4", big, happy to kind of fight centre halves, he actually likes to turn into the channels quite often and make really intelligent runs in behind. We saw him have joy in this space against Newcastle when he created Mario Lemina's goal. And on this occasion here, you can see he makes a nice intelligent run off the back of Pau Torres. Mosquera, who's in a bit of a pickle in terms of being pressed, and this is one of the occasions in the half where Villa had limited our passing options. But that longer ball was on, and we managed to have a little bit of joy in terms of creating an opportunity, which perhaps he could have done a little bit better on. So we obviously get to half time. We're really happy with how things have gone. I just wanted to touch on, obviously, changes were made from the Villa perspective. I don't think they were in any position to necessarily continue as they were. Obviously, Wolves are very comfortable in the game. But I just wanted to highlight what changes they made and why that causes some problems. One of the things that I think we've lost as a team in terms of Pedro Neto with his departure, and obviously there's the pace element, there's the ability to beat people, etc. But just having a high-class winger who pins a defender that is up against them in their half of the pitch, I think it's kind of underappreciated what that can do for a team. Leon Bailey is obviously a more natural wide man than McGinn, whether it was an enforced change or that was always likely to be the case, that Emery decided to make this change anyway. What you found with Nuri, who obviously had quite a lot of joy getting forward and supporting Mateus Cunha down the left-hand side, was that he wasn't able to get up the pitch because no matter who you are, if you are faced up with a winger who is going to receive the ball to feet, has the ability to go both ways and is productive, and Leon Bailey obviously has been for the past couple of seasons, you're going to think a little bit more in the back of your mind about being a bit more circumspect with how you play. And once you have one player less joining in to play in those tight areas that we like to, where we had a lot of joy in the first half, then you start to cause a little bit more problems for your opposition. Jan Matson obviously came on as well, a bit more pace, a bit more dynamism down the left-hand side as opposed to Luca Digne. So again, similar kind of impact I think he had on that wing. He was the one really providing the width with Bailey on the right-hand side, and it obviously stopped our defence from joining in and supporting in those wide areas. What I will say is, I showed you an out of possession image in the first half. This was literally from kickoff in the second half, and you can basically say they're like for like in terms of how the players are set up. Lemina supporting Strand Larsen in the front line in terms of pressing, Cunha slightly wider, and Nelson Semedo going tight to Jacob Ramsey, with Bellegarde really ensuring he's looking after that fullback making the late run. So the idea that we decided to sit deeper from half time immediately, it doesn't really wash with me personally. There are enforced things that cause this to happen. And what you found is that Villa just looked to press a little bit higher onto us, and ultimately, because they're basically going almost man for man in all areas of the pitch, especially up towards the top end, our defenders were forced into more difficult circumstances in terms of trying to play out You can see I've highlighted a big chasm of space, which wouldn't have been there, I don't think, in the first half because our defence, we weren't being pressed as high. Our defence would have been a bit more comfortable in possession. Craig Dawson going out towards onto his left side, he's not likely to play a ball into that space. And there isn't an option in there for him. And B, Villa have obviously cut off many of those other options inside the pitch as well and forced him into a wider position. And that was a bit of a story of the second half when it came to us trying to play out. Now, I mentioned in the first half that we had that chance with Jürgen Strand-Larsen on with a longer ball that we had a little bit of joy with. So if you are getting pressed up the pitch, you need that outlet up the top end where you can play into him from distance and you can have a little bit of joy. This was another occasion. Again, you can see Mosquera being forced wide, limited options in the middle. That Villa press of 5 players is really cutting off all the options for us to play through. But Mosquera finds a longer ball into Strand-Larsen. He flicks the ball on, and Bellegarde actually gets into a really good position high up the pitch. And I think this was probably the one decision that I think Gary O'Neill made, which I took issue with, in the sense that Larsen going off really took away that outlet for us, whether it was standing up and having the ball back to goal or running in behind and creating problems for Villa, who obviously we know like to play a high line as well. What I will say is all the coaching staff, whoever makes decisions about substitutions, they're 10, 20, 30 times more informed than we are. We obviously only see the end result. There could have been information, whether it be Larsen picked up a knock in the first half that prevented him from playing beyond the amount of time that he did. Various things can come into play in that sense. And I know it felt like Gary O'Neill wanted to reward Gonzalo Guedes for his performance in midweek as well, which is fair enough. But at the same time, maybe there was a slightly different change that could have been made, or we could have kept Strand-Larsen on for a slightly longer in the game. All told, we prevented Villa from having a shot on target in the game until the 68th minute, which, if you suggested that to be the case and, at kickoff, we'd have snapped your hand off for that being the case. And there wasn't ever, even by the end of the game, a flurry of chances that Villa had that caused us significant trouble. There were just a few instances where we let ourselves down on a couple of occasions and we were punished on those specific occasions. The other thing I wanted to point out was, again, substitutions. Onana was replaced by Ross Barkley and John Duran came on for Jacob Ramsey. What that meant was, another player in the forward line for the defenders to think about, more quality in the centre of the pitch as well from Villa. Ross Barkley, I thought, looked after the ball a hell of a lot better than Onana did. I don't think Onana had a particularly good game and probably should have been booked before he was brought off, and maybe it would have affected the way he played a little bit more as well. But and something that we definitely suffered from, Nelson Semedo and João Gomes being on yellow cards, while there was an argument for them being deserved. If you're not then making consistent decisions for the home team, which we know can happen, then it feels a little bit slightly unjust, perhaps. But I'll move on to kind of the changes that we made. I talked about players being able to give a threat in behind. Rodrigo Gomez coming off of Bellegarde, I think, was a good change in that sense, because we've seen throughout, to be honest, from pre-season, his good performance in midweek against Brighton. He makes good, intelligent runs off the ball, and he causes teams problems. So while Strand-Larsen coming off took something away from that regard, I think the idea behind Rodrigo Gomez coming on would have been to, continue a bit of a threat in behind. And also, he's going to track his man. He's a very honest worker, got plenty of legs. But the way things went, the way it manifested itself, and in terms of us being forced into playing worse in that second half, nothing really came to fruition for us. You can see here when I talk about long passes, and we did play basically the same amount from the first half compared to the second. You can see straight away where we're trying to play from in the second half is deeper in the pitch, because we're being forced longer by Villa's press, ensuring that there was nothing on into midfield. Whilst we were playing enough longer passes in the first half, They were from different areas of the pitch, higher up, switches of play, different types of passes as well, and there was just more quality on them. And we were finding our men in the second half. It just wasn't happening, and we made a lot of errors in that sense. The other thing I wanted to point out again was in terms of forward passes. Again, you can see the quality and the accuracy in the first half versus what happened in the second. Nothing was finding in the man. You're talking, 99 out of 108. It's incredibly high success rate for forward passes in that regard, and just over 50%. I think it was in the second half. So really, really stifled us in that way. And then you see what the way it goes for us in terms of that touches. Barely anything in the other half of the field when it comes to attacking areas, and that's a lot of that is down to our quality of passing. Obviously, I talked about the fact that we've lost an outlet in Strand Larsen, and that was a problem for us. But in terms of how you combat that, we just weren't necessarily making good decisions. There was instances where we're being caught offside when we didn't need to be, which obviously doesn't help us sustain attacks. I remember things like João Gomez winning the ball high, going on a break with Gedge, and playing him into a wide position. Little things like that just were sloppy and didn't allow us to capitalise on good opportunities. We obviously had a little bit of misfortune, I would say, in conceding the first goal, but also we've lost a couple of duels in the middle of the park, and they're straight into the penalty area. And again, slight fortune on the finish, but you give Ollie Watkins a chance like that, he's unlikely to miss anyway. And then the second goal is just about defending the back post, and it felt a little bit like a capitulation of the mentality and the mindset and fragility within the team, as opposed to anything majorly tactical. As we know, as I said, like first half, the game plan went to a T. You couldn't argue with it at all. But again, I kind of just wanted to finish on this table that I put together in terms of, again, I think there's an idea that I guess the narrative again that I'm trying to play down is that we sat back, and whilst it wasn't the case that we were, I don't think it was the case that we went out first half to go out and run all over Aston Villa. That definitely wasn't the way the team was set up, the personnel that were playing. We had a very comfortable midfield on the ball, and that showed itself. And I think the numbers here display that, in the sense that we're playing backward as much as we're playing forward. We're playing square almost as much as well in the first half. And all those little passes, comfortable within our space and within the teammates that are around us and playing closer together, that is how it manifests itself. And I think there's an idea that when we're in trouble in the second half, we need to go forward more often, which to a certain extent we did, but we were obviously a hell of a lot worse for it because we're losing possession much more regularly with much less quality on the ball. 54% of our passes in the second half, of all passes that we played, went forward. And nobody can tell me that gave us any benefit. We played backwards and square much less. The players who controlled the first half weren't able to influence it well enough in the second half. And I think whilst I obviously have pointed out that Strand Larsen sub was a bit of a mistake and an error on Gary O'Neill's part, I do sympathise with him in terms of, you still rely on players executing plans. That's the bottom line with any a football match. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do it. And I think there has to be a hell of a lot of responsibility from the players to make sure that they aren't letting the manager down at this moment in time. Mario Lemina at the back post on the second goal has to take accountability for that situation. We know now, obviously, that Mosquera isn't likely to play for the rest of the season, which is a big blow. There will probably be a change, I think, now because of that. I think the defensive setup was based a lot around his legs and his ability to recover and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up playing the hybrid shape that got us many results last season, enforced, of course. But Liverpool at the weekend, Brentford after that, the home game against Liverpool, you have to try and make sure you get something from it, despite the fact that it's Liverpool. Brentford is going to be a massive game, and hopefully we can find some joy in that fixture.